There's a scene close to the start of the Odyssey showing the horse being pulled into the city of Troy. It's on its side, which is a change from its usual depiction, being on its wheels and upright. That change and the shot itself shows you just how much effort goes into dragging this enormous thing into the city walls, the way that the shot is composed, and the fact that we don't actually get to know these people, and without any word of dialogue, the whole gravity of the situation is right there in the frame, and I actually felt for them, pulling the horse with urgency and desperation, hauling in the very thing that would wind up being the end of their city. The movie as a whole is quick to show what it can do with a really wide shot that shows a lot of the landscape and a lot of the atmosphere with enough detail inside the frame, but then the movie spends the next 3 hours contradicting almost everything this one shot sets up, and I never really felt that way again. Everybody's going to be arguing about what the Odyssey cut from the original source material, but my argument is what is actually cut from the material itself. I think Christopher Nolan learned the wrong lessons from his previous movie, Oppenheimer. Nolan puts the camera up close to Cillian Murphy, so we both see and feel his emotions through his facial expressions as the story evolves. The room in the movie is diegetically small to make him feel cornered and to diffuse his ego. The closeness of the IMAX camera does the same work, it supplements the story. But the Odyssey is almost the exact opposite structure. Odysseus' journey takes him across huge distances and vast, endlessly open seas. But so much of the movie ends up back in this same formula, close-ups of actors' faces, shot, reverse shot, while the environment and the atmosphere fade into the background or fall out of the frame completely. The craziest part is you can't separate this movie from how it was made. The first feature film shot entirely on IMAX. The only way to see it the way Nolan truly intended is on a 70mm IMAX screen that only exists something like 40 movie theaters on the entire planet. The technique is tied directly to the scope of the story, and he wastes it. He sticks to what worked in his last movie instead of adapting to what this story actually needs. The best way I know how to put it is to think about two different kinds of magic: stage magic and up-close street magic. I love watching Penn and Teller's fool us. The magician is up on a stage, big audience, everything in full view, and they're performing primarily for Penn and Teller, who are sitting directly in the center, front row, so that they have a full view of everything that the magician wants to show them. That's us in a movie theater, watching a movie on a huge screen. But I also love those YouTube shorts of card tricks shot from the perspective of the performer with a camera in their glasses or something else like strapped to their head or whatever. The view is up close and personal. The magician is utilizing close proximity so that the person who they're doing the magic for has a limited view of what they can see, and us watching on our phone screen, there's something that you don't have view of. There's something that's not being shown to you. Stage magic is different. You take it all in because there's more to see. For a movie, that's what makes it immersive. You get room to find your bearings, and you can start to sort of feel like you live in the world that's on the screen. So how does this actually relate to the Odyssey? It's Nolan's over-reliance on the close-up. We lose the whole stage show aspect of the movie in favor of the close-up magic trick. We're left sitting there through a 3-hour sprawling epic where most of the atmosphere and the adventure and the longing to get home is stuck completely outside the frame. Sirens on the official soundtrack has something like 1.6 million listens on Spotify. The song that scene is tied to is getting a lot of buzz on social media. But for me, that scene is proof of everything that's wrong with how this movie is constructed. It's not a total failure because the audio dulls and we are put into the perspective of the crew who fills their ears with wax, and so we are sort of blocked from being able to hear what the siren song actually sounds like. And there's a few shots where we get to see the sirens off in the distance, very briefly, hanging out on the rocks. We should, as the audience, be left longing and wanting to know more about what those sirens are like. So I will give the scene that credit. However, my problem with it is one of his crew members scoops the wax out of his ear and is so compelled by the sirens that he jumps overboard to his death. That's the level of temptation that we're being shown. Meanwhile, Odysseus is only tied to the mast from around his elbows down to his knees, and he should be doing a lot more with his body to sell the fact that this is something that's taking over his entire spirit and his entire essence. He's only yelling and screaming. He's not actually doing anything to thrash against the mast and act as if he would or could break free. And I think that it's a failure of capturing everything inside the frame. Compare all of that to a movie like The Green Knight. There are a lot of parallels with the imagery, the mythology, a journey in its own right. There's a part where Sir Gawain is tied up in the forest after being robbed, similar to Odysseus being tied to the mast, and David Lowery, the writer and director of Green Knight, has enough restraint to just show the camera slowly panning around the forest. This is his fate being spelled out by the camera itself, panning around the forest and showing decay and showing the passing of time until eventually it returns and lands back on Sir Gawain as a skeleton. When you go to the Odyssey, there's a vast contradiction between how David Lowery approaches a scene like this and how Christopher Nolan does. And I feel like if I were to have just read that part of the Odyssey, the original story, it would have hit harder than what Nolan showed on the screen. Whereas in The Green Knight, because it relies almost purely on the visual, it's something that's unique to the movie itself that you don't quite get from the original text. That whole card trick analogy keeps coming back to me because when done wrong, you start to get more suspicious than if you have enough of a vantage point. So take the interior of the halls of Ithaca. They're lit by flames all throughout the corridor and the halls. There are certain frames where the lights flicker all the way out to complete black, and it's only for a split second. But the thing is, if it were really lit by that much fire to fill the room, there would never be an instance where all flames in the room would flicker out at once for there to be pure black on anyone's faces. I know this sounds very CinemaSins-y, but what I'm really trying to convey here is that when everything is framed a certain way, you start becoming more hyper aware of the things that are not in view, and your brain starts to fill in the patterns of the things that you're not seeing because everything's too close and it's not pulled back enough to give you a full view of everything that's going on. You start to just realize like, oh, those are not real flames. That's just some programmable light that's off screen trying to mimic a fire. The classic counterexample of this done right is Barry Lyndon. Barry Lyndon is well known for being shot with some of the scenes being entirely lit purely by candlelight. And so take a look at those scenes and you can see how much the light actually fills the room. We already know that Christopher Nolan does have an affinity for Kubrick. Basically, Interstellar is his love letter to 2001. And I would have loved to see a little bit more of that inspiration shine through in the Odyssey towards something like Barry Lyndon, where we would have these very ornate, decorated interior shots, as opposed to, again, these close-up and like close medium shots. It's the same thing in Hades. Agamemnon's ghost is supposed to be floating towards Odysseus. This looming, ominous figure drifting to the front of the line from behind all of these dead soldiers. But the camera is so close that I'm not seeing a ghost. I'm just seeing Benny Safdie being wheeled towards the screen by some mechanism. In the beginning of the movie, I talk about the horse being pulled into the city of Troy. If we know that we can zoom out far enough to show that level of information on the screen, why can't we pull back a little bit just to see a little bit more of how Agamemnon fills not only just the screen itself, but the space among and in contrast to all of the soldiers and Odysseus's crew. Again, this is the first movie shot entirely on IMAX cameras. There's more information than ever before that you can actually fit inside of the frame, yet it's shot entirely like it's some chamber piece. I get that part of the narrative of the story is that we're in isolation with Odysseus's crew on the ship, and so naturally we're going to have some close proximity to them so that we know what it's like for them to be stranded out to sea, trying desperately to find their way home. And the movie does pull back a few times to show some sweeping landscapes and some establishing shots, and they do look great. But it happens so rarely that it's not just the camera that gets wasted, but it's also the runtime of the movie itself. You have a bigger camera, a longer runtime, and you're shooting it with close-ups and rapid-fire cuts. There's actually a technical reason for a lot of the cutting that happens in the movie. Shooting on the IMAX film that he chose to record this movie on only lasts about 3 minutes before you have to like change over the reel and reload. So a dialogue scene that runs longer than about 3 minutes, you basically can't shoot it in one continuous take. You're forced to break it up. One of the things that stood out for me the most was when Odysseus is on Calypso's island and is talking to Calypso. The scenes of them talking to each other are constructed in a way where we are focused on Calypso speaking to Odysseus, and as she's talking, the camera's focused on her, but then the edit cuts to Odysseus listening for like a half a second, and then it cuts back to Calypso talking. You already have that in the camera. Just stay on Calypso talking. You don't have to remind me that Matt Damon is there. I remember. All these little choices are so jarring, and I think part of it is because you're shooting on this IMAX film that needs to be reloaded every 3 minutes, so in the editing room, you're working with an overwhelming amount of 3-minute clips, and I don't know, maybe you just get bogged down in all the details. And again, I think it's the technology that gets in the way of the story. The IMAX camera is so big and it's so loud that Christopher Nolan and his crew had to create this thing that they called the blimp to muffle the sound. And because it was so big, during the scenes that they shot with two people talking to each other, they had to set up this contraption that had a double mirror so that someone standing on one side of the IMAX camera would look into a mirror that reflected into another mirror that the other person was looking into. But you have to go through these lengths to create a way around that because the camera is so big. It prevents you from having more wide shots so that you can see both of them talking to each other. And there is this one part where John Bernthal and Tom Holland are talking to each other as they walk down this path. That's a legitimately good shot, but it's so rare. It's like one scene out of a 3-hour movie that actually stood out to me because it was captured in camera. All the rest of these things that you're doing are just detracting from the overall experience. Overall, the camera and the runtime are the two things that I keep coming back to as being wasted. There's actually a third and fourth thing, the budget and the talent. The Odyssey's budget is showing as $250 million, and a movie I compared to earlier in this video, The Green Knight was made for only $15 million. So you can make 16 Green Knights for the cost of one Odyssey. And you've got this cast of modern A-list actors, which fine, right? I have no criticism of the casting choices except for how long they appear in the actual movie. So I read that Agamemnon's actual on-screen time is something like 4 minutes. Calypso, Sinon, Helen, all these supporting characters land somewhere between like 4 and 10 minutes each in a 3-hour movie. That's about 2 to 5% of the total runtime. So look, that's all just an estimate, but it confirms what I felt while I was sitting there watching the movie. Like, why aren't these characters more present? You know, they're a big part of the marketing campaign and everybody made such a big fuss over who was going to be in the movie and whatever. Again, I don't care about any of that, but actually sitting there and watching it and these characters literally show up for a tiny fraction of the actual runtime. Again, that's just another element of this that feels wasted. Towards the end of the movie, Odysseus finally washes up on the shores of Ithaca. This reunion, the main character to his home that he spent 20 years of his life and 2/3 of this 3-hour movie trying to find, it all gets hand waved away with exposition. He washes up on the beach. Athena is sitting next to him. He asks something like, "Where am I?" And Athena responds, "Don't you recognize your home?" The gravity of the situation is completely robbed. We should be seeing Odysseus looking around, wandering around, and I looked it up, and in the original story, he does a little bit of investigating and talking to people that he comes across to get his bearings, and we see none of that in the movie. Have him breathe in the air of the ocean shore, have him take a fistful of sand or rocks on the beach and sort of like feel it in his hands and start to realize where he is. Christopher Nolan loves to do a callback or a flashback to a previous scene. Let's do some mirror shot where we see Odysseus on the day that he leaves for his expedition and cut back to him finally arriving. And we can see inside the camera something that he realizes it for himself and that we as the audience also realize. Don't just give it this one throwaway line. But I actually think that highlights the bigger problem overall. Because we never really get a chance to understand what Ithaca actually looks like and get to memorize and keep that in our mind, there would be no opportunity to show that to us if it happened in the way that I described. So in actuality, you have to be told out loud by a character that this is Ithaca. Otherwise, there's no other way to know. Everything I've been describing thus far really is circling the same point. I think Nolan took learnings from Oppenheimer and he applied it to a movie that needs so much more visual scale and movement. This is not the story of a theoretical physicist who is spending most of his time in classrooms and labs. This is the story of an ancient Greek warrior who fights cyclopses and giant silver knights. Just like Nolan used magic trick structure to make The Prestige or the converging back and forth timelines in Memento, the Odyssey needed its own unique structure. Instead, it's just Nolan shooting on bigger cameras. I'm actually a proponent of using the word gimmick not only in a negative connotation. Sometimes a gimmick is a clever thing, but the Odyssey's whole gimmick really is only how it's shot. I keep coming back to that horse from the beginning of the movie. We know Christopher Nolan can do these kinds of shots. He does it very infrequently. He does it in other movies. He just spends the majority of the runtime in the Odyssey not actually doing it after he showed us in the very beginning that he can. And by the way, I'm not some Nolan hater looking to make a video bashing a popular director. The Prestige is my favorite Christopher Nolan movie. I have a lot of affinity for that movie, and I actually think Interstellar is a huge achievement, and I actually think his last movie, Oppenheimer, is his magnum opus. At this point, I think he peaked at Oppenheimer, and I'm actually very curious to see what he eventually winds up following up with, because there'll be lessons that he learns from this movie that he takes to the next one. And I was all excited for the Odyssey too. I went to go see it at the Chinese theater near me in Hollywood. I saw it in 70mm IMAX. The auditorium is a beautiful old historic building. There was a light projected onto the screen that showed the Odyssey in 70mm IMAX, and there was this overture music playing in the auditorium as people filled in and sat in their seats. The curtain slowly opened and people cheered. Nolan makes movies that legitimately feel like an event to be a part of. But for a movie that's supposed to chronicle a long, arduous journey, the entire runtime, I almost felt like I was never anywhere specific at all. In The Prestige, a movie about magic, Nikola Tesla asks Angier if he knows the phrase, "Man's reach exceeds his grasp." He says it's a lie. Man's grasp exceeds his nerve. The Odyssey is the first time Nolan's reach and grasp fully coincide, but because of the decisions that he made, his nerve fell short of what he could achieve.